Okay, I'd like to first of all welcome. We are now actually hearing being was sent out to YouTube and a number of other places in addition to the Zoom session. So we'll probably get an update later on how many people actually are joining from other than in the Zoom session. Um, so let's start. This is, of course, the second session on the unit. The whole series, of course, was called Breaking with Old Christian Paradigms. This first unit is really based around Noahide identity. Um, yeah, Mark, you have to be muted here a second. Let me see if I can find you. I don't. Okay, Mark, muted. It is good if you mute while we're talking, so that we don't get any crosstalk in there, and it interrupts me and causes me to lose my concentration. So, anyways, this series of Zoom discussions talks, which are now being ported over to YouTube, we'll see how that works out. Is called Breaking with the Old Christian Paradigm. And the purpose of it, of course, is that as we all know, and certainly all of you are here know, most of you at one time were Christians. So you're being ex-Christians, you're coming from a certain background. And there's certain things that you bring as Christians into it, and certain paradigms and certain things that you had as Christians that you bring into Torah observant Christians, Messianic Jews, whatever type of Christian you call yourself, as you became Noahide. And because of that, there are certain paradigms that you had, certain ways of looking at things that you had there, which, whether consciously or subconsciously, you're bringing over, which do not fit the paradigm for what a Noahide's supposed to have. Now, last week we discussed this quite a bit. What we did is, first of all, we defined what it means to be a Noahide. When the Noahide movement started about 30 some years ago, the people who originally called themselves Noahides did it to show, as non-Jews, they were trying to keep the 7 Noahide laws, but in a specific way. When they started, what we're saying is that the Maimonides, the Rambam, describes what it means to be a Noahide, or for the pious from the nations, and those who call themselves Noahide wanted to be that. So Noahide, while it's not a halachic term, is a term which has a meaning being roughly equivalent to what the Rambam says, the pious of the nations. And last time, we actually discussed first what that means. Basically, what it means is that you accept the 7 laws, but it's not just that you follow the 7 laws, but you follow the 7 laws based on that they're in the Torah and they're in rabbinic literature, and you follow it according to what the rabbis teach. So that's extremely important. It's not just not to keep the 7 laws and, I'm giving 7 laws because it was a tradition, whatever. There's something more than that. And so there are certain differences. And what I tried to do last week is we dealt with the major difference. And you can, of course, the recording is out for actually all 3 sessions on my YouTube channel. You look under Moshe Shulman, it has a picture of me, so you know which one it is. Also, one of them, Dan put out on his thing. So we talked a little bit about it. I just want to give a little bit so we have up to date what we're doing. After discussing what the Rambam says there, what it is, I started to discuss about different errors. And the first issue I dealt with is a paradigm error that we see very commonly being ported over from having been Messianic or having been Torah observant into being Noahide. And that is with regards to 2 things. Number one is, as Messianics or as Torah observant Christians, you believe fundamentally in something called sola scriptura, meaning that you would pick up a book and you would read the book, and what you understood is the way you would follow. And that is not the paradigm. The paradigm that Noahides have is the same paradigm as a Jew has, okay? In fact, if you really want to put in the terms that I used that last time, a Noahide is really an Orthodox non-Jew, an Orthodox goy. You're just like there's an Orthodox Jew who's following the 613 commandments. A Noahide is an Orthodox non-Jew who's following the 7 commandments. It's functionally exactly the same thing like that. And just like for a Jew, that our life is governed by the rabbinic texts, the Torah, of course, but the rabbinic texts which explain exactly how these are to be fulfilled and how to be done. So Noahides, the same thing is their life is and how their practice is supposed to be are based on the same thing, what it says in rabbinic literature and how it's discussed. Okay. The next unit we're going to talk about specifically rabbis you should follow, but it's the same thing you're supposed to follow. You should have a rabbi that you have, and we're going to discuss more about that in the next unit, which in Yirtzeh Hashem will be in January, God willing. We'll have that. That's when we start. But you should be following a rabbi, not just any rabbi, but somebody who has shown, and we're going to discuss what that means, that they actually fundamentally understand what being a Noahide is about, what the Rambam meant, and how actually you're supposed to actualize this in your real life. Okay, that's basically what we did last time. We talked about things about how paradigms of prayer meetings and Bible study, but these are going to come up again in different issues. We're going to have a whole unit discussing Noahides and religion, which will deal with things like prayer and stuff like that. We're going to have Noahides and the Tanakh. We're going to discuss what the Tanakh is and how Noahides can relate to it and how they're supposed to relate to learning and stuff like that. Those are other issues. We touched on them, but I don't want to do too much on that. We discussed it last time, and now we're going to go on. I don't want to get bogged down in that. Okay, the main point of today's session is we're going to talk about probably the most prevalent problem among Noahides, which makes them technically no longer be able to be considering themselves as being from the pious of the nations. That's something which I refer to as Judaism light. Actually, I coined the word about 20 plus years ago. It's a shame I didn't patent it because I'd be able to make a little bit of money because a lot of people bring that also, make a little money on the side from my patent, but whatever. Let me decide what I meant as Judaism's light at that time, and it still is prevalent. It's still the same problem now than it was then. In fact, in some senses, it's even more. Okay, what does Judaism light mean? It means that once you are keeping the 7, every other mitzvah is optional. You can optionally take on any mitzvah you want. Now, this is a view that is very, very prominent, as you certainly all are aware of it. And in fact, it's a view that if you read carefully, whether it's Rabbi Weiner, Rabbi Blumenstiel, Rabbi anyway, they all say that that's not true. We're going to go into Rambam. I'm going to explain what the Rambam says and understanding why it is. But they all agree that it's not true. There is no way of taking, if you're following the 7 laws, there's no such thing as I'm going to do another mitzvah. I'm going to take it on that mitzvah. Okay? But that is essentially what Judaism's light is about. Judaism's light is about the idea that, the Jews have 613, and we have like 7 basic, but, hey, if I like something else, I can do that also. I can do that mitzvah also. Doesn't make a difference what it is. Eat kosher, build a sukkah, keep Shabbos, whatever it is. It can be anything like that. And, all of you have been in the Noahide world for a while, who've been in the Noahide world for a while, have seen what I'm talking about. And this has nothing to do with the sincerity of the particular Noahide. Some of it, I always blame the rabbis and not the Noahides, because after all, it's our job as rabbis to clarify these issues, okay? But if you read carefully Rabbi Weiner's Divine Code, you'll see that he agrees with that. Does it quite specifically. Rabbi Blumenstiel, and any of the other rabbis that are around, you will see that they agree that the fact is that a Noahide has only 7 mitzvahs, and they can't take on another mitzvah. Now, by the time we get to the end of the day, you'll see where the problem is coming from and how it's misunderstood, whatever. But we'll just get to it. Those of you who've already heard the other sessions that I have, no one will be going to, but we'll get to that. So where is the whole issue coming from? Where are the problems come from? Okay. The problem here is coming from, obviously, from the Rambam. In his work, the Mishnah Torah. Yeah, please, Aaron, anybody who has a microphone on, just turn it off for now. And there'll be time later on for questions. Okay. The issue, the problem comes about from how people are interpreting or reading into in the Mishnah Torah from the Rambam. In chapter 10, in paragraph 9 and 10, or we would call it halacha law 9 and 10, but we can say paragraph, it doesn't make a difference. The Rambam clarifies what the paradigm for a Noahide is supposed to be. What the paradigm is for when I say Noahide, you should think the pious of the nations of the world. So when I say that, it means what is the paradigm? How are you supposed to live your life? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the main points in paragraph 9. We'll discuss it, and I'm going to open up for questions. And then we'll go to paragraph 10, where the problems start coming in. And then I'll explain that also. So in paragraph 9, there are 4 points that the Rambam makes. And before we do it, it's fundamental. There's a fundamental issue that of very great importance that has to be understood for Noahides. Okay, when the Rambam was writing Mishnah Torah, he was not writing for any non-Jews. He had no expectation that any non-Jew would read it. And if you read the language, as we'll see from now, it was clearly written for Jews. So because of that, there are misunderstandings that come about because, you're reading it, and sometimes non-Jews will pick up because the fact of the matter is the Maimonides Mishnah Torah is easy to find out there. I know Chabad has it on its site. In English, all these things are pretty much available, which they weren't available beforehand. But when Noahides read it, as is normal when you read any book, you feel it's talking to you directly, and you don't understand actually it's talking to Jewish people as opposed to Noahides. Okay, just had a couple more people. So let's do it. The Rambam there's actually 4 different things discussed, or 4 different points within that paragraph 9. The first 2, which I refer to the 2 big ones, the Rambam says this: the non-Jew who learns Torah is liable to a death penalty. When he talks about death penalty, he's talking about a divine death penalty. And it's very important to understand that in the Torah, the overwhelming majority of sins are liable to punishments from Hashem. They are not liable to punishments from the court system. Okay? If you look throughout, either from the court system or you're liable to bring a sacrifice, for example. The overwhelming majority of sins that people do would not bring a person either a sacrifice or a judicial punishment, but are directly with Hashem. Okay, they're directly under his, purview, I guess you say. So it says here that a non-Jew who learns Torah is liable to a death penalty from Hashem, and he should only be learning those things that have to do with the 7 mitzvahs of themselves alone. Meaning that what a Noahide learns has to directly be around his 7 commandments. Now, one of our units is going to be Noahides and the Tanakh and Torah, in which I will explain the Tanakh and Torah, the paradigm of Tanakh and Torah, which is quite different from Christianity, and I will also discuss about the issue of learning Torah, how it applies to a Noahide in the practical point of view. I'm very much interested in the practical point of view, and so we'll get into that. But let's just leave it right now that except for learning in the 7 commandments what they need to do in order to fulfill them, a Noahide should not learn Torah at all. Okay, next it says, as number 2, is the same thing that a non-Jew should not keep Shabbos even one of the days of the weeks. Whether it's Tuesday, Wednesday, doesn't make it. And if he does it himself, or like that, if he does make a day of rest like that, then of course he is under a divine punishment. And certainly we don't have to say about making any kind of a holiday, whether imitating a Jewish holiday or making a holiday themselves. A non-Jew is not allowed to make it, no matter what day of the week. Now, with regards to keeping Shabbos, the commentaries are quite clear of where the source is. The source comes from Reish Lakish in the Gemara, where he brings a verse that says, day and night you should have no rest. Meaning that a non-Jew is supposed to work 7 days a week. Okay? Now, somebody asked earlier, so we'll just say, what about nowadays where there's weekends? In America, Saturday and Sunday are weekends. In countries like Israel, it's Friday and Saturday. But essentially, there's weekends. That would not apply. You don't have to go into work on Saturday, just and do it if there's no reason to. But of course, from the other side, if your work asks you to come on Saturday, then you should not refrain from doing it because you're saying you're making a Shabbos. Refraining from work, you're supposed to work. Okay, quick question came in here. Um, as to who does the death penalty apply to? The death penalty applies to any non-Jew. Any non-Jew. Is no distinction. There is no ontological distinction among non-Jews. Every non-Jew is essentially the same. It's either you are keeping the mitzvahs, and then we could call you a Noahide, or I like an Orthodox goy, an Orthodox non-Jew, because you're doing what you're supposed to do, just like a Jew who keeps his commandments and follows the law. It's called an Orthodox Jew. He's doing what he's supposed to do. So if you're doing it, you do it. There's nothing. It's like being pregnant. Either you're pregnant or not. Either you're following it or you're not doing it. It's very simple like that. If you're doing it, we call you a Noahide, and if you're not doing it, it's not like there's nothing like Noahide plus or Noahide, super Noahide, or super Noahide, or no. Either you're doing it or you're not doing it, and so this divine punishment applies to any non-Jew. Okay, no distinction of whether you're doing anything else. Okay, now the third one here is the one which starts causing problems. The Rambam says here the general rule is like this. And again, remember, he's speaking to a Jew. So he says, the general says, we do not allow them, meaning the non-Jew. A Jew should not allow a non-Jew to do what's called Chiddush Das, make his own religion, to do mitzvahs by themselves from their own ideas, their own knowledge. Either they should become a ger tzedek, either they should convert completely and accept all the mitzvahs of the Torah, like any other Jew, or they should stay within their Torah, which is the 7 commandments, and not add to it and not take away from it. This is very fundamental to understanding. When it comes to mitzvah, doing something is a mitzvah. A Noahide has 7. They're supposed to either keep 7, and if 7 is not enough, they should convert and do all of it. There's nothing in the middle. Okay? It's either 7 or nothing. You should not add to it, and certainly should not do less than that. You should not say, "Oh, well, I'm not going to do this particular mitzvah, whatever it is." I like, I don't know, something that's considered. No, you do all of them, and that's it. Okay, one second. Some quick questions came in. Okay. Do me a favor, ask that question later. Okay, it's not directly associated with this, and when we do a break, we can talk about it. So the Rambam is saying something clear, and this is very fundamental. Rabbi Weiner understands this. Rabbi Blumenstiel understands it. Rabbi Trickett, all the rabbis who are intimately knowledgeable about Jewish law understand it. There are only 7 commandments for the Noahides. They are not to add to them and not to take away from them. You cannot build a sukkah and say, I want to keep the mitzvah for sukkah. No such thing. You cannot keep the mitzvah for sukkah. You can't not say, okay, I'm going to do the 7, but I'm going to do the mitzvah sukkah, or I'm going to do the mitzvah for Shabbos. I'm going to do this. I know it goes around, and I know a lot of people do it because it's a misunderstanding of what's being taught by Rabbi Weiner. It's quite clear there are only 7 commandments, and they are only commandments. Okay? And what's important from here is that it's not just that it says that these are forbidden. It says that as a Jew, I am required to tell you and try and convince you not to do it. So, for example, let's take Ronald, because I feel very good using Ronald as an example. Let's say Ronald tells me, you know what, for me, I want to eat in a sukkah every year. The temperature's like fall type temperature is really nice. It's going from winter to summer. It's beginning to look nicer there because he comes from Australia and everything is turned over upside down. Everything's all wrong. They're standing on their heads. Everything down Australia is upside down. So and so he said, I'm going to build a sukkah because I like it. It's the winter's ending and it's getting towards summer, and I like to say, and I want to do the mitzvah because that's a really nice time of year to do it. So I'm going to make sure I eat in the sick of all of this. And so I am required to tell Ronald, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to do that. And if you do, you're under a divine edict. You cannot consider yourself really a Noahide, someone who's keeping the 7 mitzvahs. Okay, that's what the Rambam is saying here. He's talking to us a Jew, but the point is we get from that quite clearly that you're doing wrong, but it's not this, you're doing wrong by doing that. You're doing wrong to the extent that I have to tell you that you're doing wrong and try and influence you not to do that. And in the next part of it, he continues, not only the general rule, he talks about it quite clearly what he says. Okay? However, if we see a non-Jew learning Torah besides the 7 commandments, or is keeping Shabbos, he's refraining from going, his boss calls him in on Saturday to come to work, and he says, I'm not going to do it to Shabbos. He doesn't do it. Or he does Chiddush, he's creating a religion to himself. He's made new customs, made kinds of things that it's not the 7 mitzvahs and not the 600, but it's a whole new thing that's, this is Noahide religion, it's a whole new thing. If he does that, we are supposed to actually force them in any way we can. Let them know that by doing that they are liable to a divine punishment, but we don't kill them. It's a divine punishment. Okay, so it's very important because he's talking to Jews as Jews. We have responsibility, and that if a non-Jew is going beyond what they're supposed to do, they're not allowed to do. Now, so where do we know the idea of not going beyond the 7 commandments? There's a verse in Deuteronomy 33:4. It says that the Torah that Moses gave us, is an inheritance to the congregation of Jacob, meaning that the Torah was given as an inheritance for the congregation of Jacob. Now, there in the Gemara in Chagiga, and it's also in Sanhedrin, I think also mentioned it also there, that they talk about it with reference to learning Torah. That the learning of Torah is something that it's an inheritance of the Jewish people. And in fact, the Gemara, I believe it is in Sanhedrin, says that when a non-Jew learns Torah that doesn't, it's like stealing. You're stealing an inheritance which doesn't belong to you. And that's why doesn't have to be said separately, because you're actually stealing something that doesn't belong to you. Now, there's a very important work that anybody who is the Rambam should go into. You have to be on a certain level of knowledge of rabbinic literature, because it's very difficult. It's called Chemis Yisrael, and it's a commentary on the Rambam, specifically the laws of Noah. And he discusses around this, and he brings a number of sources that says like this. The word there, where it's discussed there in Chagiga, it doesn't say learning Torah is the inheritance of Jewish people, but Torah itself, meaning all of the 613 commandments are an inheritance of Jewish people. And so when a non-Jew learns that, he's stealing something that's not part of the inheritance. Now, just like with learning about the 7 mitzvahs, doing the 7 mitzvahs are excluded because that is an inheritance for non-Jewish nations. Okay, but what the Torah is talking about there is not just learning Torah, but it learns anything. And the Chemis brings a number of sources from it. And the concept itself, of course, you see it. If you read Rabbi Weiner, he talks about, let's take the mitzvahs. Blumenstiel talks about mitzvah. Everybody's quite clear about that. A non-Jew is not allowed to take a mitzvah to say, I'm doing this mitzvah. I don't have 7. I now have 10. I have this because I'm doing this. That's totally out. Okay, and that's pretty much all rabbis that I know that are involved in teaching, who are knowledgeable, will say that. As far as a Jew being allowed, Aaron asked a question, is a Jew allowed to ask a Noahide to work on his business during Shabbos? That is a little bit complicated. There are a number of chapters in Shulchan Aruch discussing business where there's a partnership with a Jew and a non-Jew. I'm not going to get into it right now because it doesn't have to do with Noahide laws, and quite frankly, it is very complex. Okay, non-Jew doing something for a Jew, it can be very complex, and Noahides don't have to worry about it. If you're Jewish, Aaron, if you really want to know privately, I can sit with you. I can even point you to the chapters in Shulchan Aruch on Hilchos Shabbos where you should look into. There's a number of them from in the very beginning, things like, if you're going on a non-Jewish ship, if you have a business with a non-Jew, and various different things that have to do with that. It's much too complicated, way outside of what we're trying to do here. Okay, but the answer for that is sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. It's not so simple. Okay, again, it's a different issue. On the other hand, the question of whether a non-Jew, like we have a concept of a Shabbos goy, happens occasionally. I live in the Jewish area. Sometimes it happens. The steam is not on. Okay, Rabbi, as far as honoring your parents, we'll discuss about that. Okay, that's part of the religion of Noahide, and that will come up. I'm going to actually mention that. It's a good example, which will come up soon. So I'll just leave it on the side. For example, the idea of a Shabbos goy, where a non-Jew does something for a Jew on Shabbos, that's absolutely right. Of course, there's certain distinctions of what you're allowed to ask. The Jewish person is supposed to know what it is. You as a non-Jew don't have to worry about that. When a Jew asks you to turn on a light on Shabbos, or he tells you that, if you live in Chicago where it's very cold and somehow or other the steam wasn't turned on, and he sees you say, come and please help me turn this on, there's a certain way you're supposed to say it, but even as it doesn't say it the proper way, he indicates to you, I would say for me, maybe once or twice a year it comes out that I have to try and find a non-Jew, which for me is very difficult in where I live, because I live in a very big Jewish ghetto. I think my son recently had to run to a store around the corner, which is open 24 hours, and find a non-Jew working there and ask him to come over to help, because of something that was a problem that had to be dealt with on Shabbos. We couldn't do it. But yeah, there are conditions which a non-Jew is allowed to do. There are conditions which a non-Jew is not allowed to do. I might go into this a little bit more. We talk about the Ger Toshiv, which is going to be the last unit of Noahide identity, and what the problems is, and where they get off, where they're way off, and where they're actually telling Noahides not to do things they should be doing. But we get it. But essentially, when it comes to Shabbos, a non-Jew is allowed to do anything on Shabbos. And as far as doing something for a Jew, there are certain things about that, but you should be more, rely on the Jew to speak, to speak to a rabbi to know what's going on. Don't get into it, because it's most Jews don't understand it, so you don't, and especially besides business, because the business stuff is less known, and that people always go to rabbis about that. But again, what's important, what I was trying to say, is that we have a clear understanding here that a Noahide has 7 commandments only, and he's not supposed to take any other commandment on beyond that. Okay, and that is universally held. If you ask any of the rabbis that Rabbi Weiner, can I take on another mitzvah? Okay, I want to do this or that mitzvah. I want to make another mitzvah that I'm doing in addition to the 7. Any rabbi who knows the stuff, Rabbi Weiner, Rabbi Shulman, will say, no, you're not allowed to do that. It's a thing that's universal. I was just reading I was discussing with somebody, because there are things that we disagree about, certain things. A response from Rabbi Usher Weiss from Israel. And he's also quite clear about that. No, there's no other mitzvahs. Okay? No, there's 7, and that's it. Okay, let me stop a second, and if you want to raise your hand and ask some questions, that is certainly fine. If you want to tell me you want my address so you can be with a pitchfork, and that's also allowable. I have been saying the same thing, by the way, for 30 years, so it's not like it's almost 30 years, so it's not like it's any new. And I made a lot of unfriends, as you say. Okay, Linda, why don't you go first?
Hi. I have several questions, but I'll just ask one right now. Is
Remember,
it true?
if you have multiple questions, what it may mean is that if somebody else has questions like that also, they're just ashamed to raise their hand. They think I'm going to bite their head off or something. I won't do, but
What I was told is that the 10 Commandments, and that was for the Jewish people, out of that comes the 361 commandments. For the Noahide, 7 commandments, but there's kind of like out of the categories like 60 or something like that. Is that true? And can we find all of them in Torah, Tanakh?
Okay. Let me answer one question at a time
Okay.
because you ask questions that are very common. Okay, and so because it's very common, let me just ask them one at a time. I'll answer your second one first, even though that's not the way you're supposed to do. You're supposed to ask first one first, and second one. But I will act like an ignoramus, and I will answer your second one first because it's the easy one. No, it doesn't say anything like that specifically in the Torah or the Tanakh. In fact, the Torah Tanakh is very unspecific. The place where we learn in the Gemara Sanhedrin about the seven commandments is based on a drash, which means an interpretation of the verse, which is not necessarily what it says there literally. The seven laws are known exclusively through our Jewish tradition. There are indications of things like murder and stealing and stuff like that. We see that God doesn't approve sexual immorality, but we'll see various places where it's talking. But there's no place where it says, yeah, these are specifically done. You'll see sometimes a commentary, for example, with recently last week, where the issue of Shechem took Dinah, that it mentions that sexual immorality was something that the Noahides all knew. That's why they were liable for death penalty. That's one of the reasons why the city was wiped out, because they violated that. So while it's not explicitly there, it's certainly known from Jewish tradition, and there's certainly interpretations that are there from that. Your first question is one of the most common. It goes back to a book from a Rabbi Lichtenstein, an excellent book, but I'm afraid if you look at it, you might become a little bit too confused because the author of that is assuming you know more than you do. Here he talks about each commandment, then underneath it, he discusses various things in the Torah which are commanded to the Jewish people as a separate command, which relate to that command. So he comes up with 66 different things that relate to it. There's a couple of them that are questionable, but essentially that's pretty much correct. But the point is like this, what you have to understand, there are seven, but the question is like this, what does it mean? The easiest one to explain is sexual immorality. There's a prohibition for Noahide, for non-Jews, to be sexually immoral, okay? What does that mean? Okay, how do you violate it? Well, there's various things you can do that for a Jew would be a separate commandment. So for example, best example is, let's say, Bob, I'm going to pick on you, I'm sorry. Okay, Bob has a sister who's married, okay? And he is involved in unspeakable relationships with his sister, okay? Now, for a Noahide, he has violated one command. He's violated the command of not being involved in sexual immorality. That's a classic case of what it is. However, if Bob was a Jew, he violated two separate commands. One is adultery, and one is doing things with his sister. They're two separate things. And in fact, if he done it unintentionally, he would have had to bring two sacrifices. Okay? In fact, at Yevumas, it talks about how you can there's all discussion about how you can do one act and violate multiple things and require yourself to bring multiple sacrifices. Okay, that's because for a Jew, each commandment is different. For Noahide, only has one command, that is sexual immorality. You're not to be sexually immoral, but that involves certain things like adultery and something like that. But if you do one act, which is two or three things at one time, then you really only violated one command. So when he talks about 66, he's not saying that you have 66 separate commands. Is that one command of sexual morality is included. The specifics is if you violate any one of these, you have violated that. Whereas for a Jew, if he violates any one of these as one act, he's violated multiple acts. Okay? For Noahide, it's always only going to be one. For a Jew, it could be multiple. So in essence, sort of there are 66 in the sense that there's 66 things which help to define what that specific thing is, but there's not 66 in the sense that you have 66 separate mitzvahs. Does that explain it to you? Yeah. That is, by the way, I would say that is the number one question I get whenever we talk about seven commandments. Because, again, the author of that was writing for the book that came out was written for people who are biblical scholars, for rabbinic scholars. And it's an excellent book. It's an excellent thing. I love it. But it wasn't written for Noahides because it can be confusing. And one of the things about Noahide path that I'm trying to is to try and get through some of this confusion. Okay? because it can be confusing. I mean, let's face it, your background's from Christianity, all kinds of, you weren't raised, in rabbinics. There's certain things you don't take, you know. One of the things, if you speak to anybody who converts to Judaism, is it's somewhat of a culture shock because Jewish people take so many certain things for granted that as a convert they didn't even have any relationship to such things. And so, it's something you have to understand is that, sometimes things can be, you're not going to understand, what you're not going to catch what this person is saying, where somebody who was trained will understand it. So, for example, you may not have noticed that Rabbi Wein is quite clear that you cannot have more than 7 commandments. Rabbi Blumenstiel is very clear you cannot have more 7 commandments. There's no way of keeping some, because you're not catching when he says that. You're only catching the other part where he says, under certain conditions, you can do certain things, not as a commandment. Okay, we're going to discuss about that later. But, okay, so you're not catching this. And, it's not your fault. I mean, again, I always blame the rabbis because really, someone's a teacher is really responsible to make sure that the people he's speaking to understand what you're trying to say. And it's more, I mean, listen, I know Rabbi Weiner very well. We've met a number of times, and he's a big scholar, and he's a very modest person. He's very unassuming, very modest person, and he's just a very knowledgeable person. Rabbi Blumenstiel and I have spent many hours on the phone discussing issues, many hours on the phone. So, what I'm trying to say is that, I'm trying to, unpack certain things also, besides teaching, but I'm trying to unpack certain things for you. Okay, let me go on to Murray. And then if you still have a question, leave your hand up, but let me let Murray speak. Murray.
Thank you, Rabbi. By the way, I appreciate again what you're doing, that you're actually separating things out for us and clearing up the confusion. My question, there's 2 questions. Basically, one is, along with what Linda and Rabbi had mentioned, aside from the honoring father and mother, there's also the 10th commandment of not bearing false witness against the neighbor. There's also the idea of not coveting. So I think ritualistically, yes, absolutely no Sabbath, no holidays, none of this other stuff, but Musar, is that something that we can look at, not necessarily as a commandment, but something that we do? And then my other question is,
Okay, let me answer that one first, and then I'll let you answer the second question. Okay.
Okay.
What you're saying is true. It's very important. One of our units is going to be Noahide and religion, in which I'm going to talk about things like that. I followed up Moshe Feinstein in his understanding of the next paragraph 10 and how he does it, which is slightly different from what Rabbi Weiner and Rabbi Blumenstiel. We all understand what our difference is, but what is, and I'll explain it. But it's quite clear that things like honoring your parents and certain different things are obligations. You can't say commandments, but they're obligations for Noahide, and they basically, as far as I understand, it basically comes out of the 7th commandment, where you're supposed to create a world, a type of world where the world is a world of peace, where a world of justice, stuff like that. Certain things come out of that. Other things come out of your knowledge that the belief that there's a God. When we talk about religion, Noahide, I'm going to go into that much more, and I'm sure you guys are going to have a lot of good questions about that. But that's basically the point of it. The answer is yes. The idea of it, keeping the honoring your parents is not because it's a commandment, 10 commandments. It's because it's more associated with the 7th commandment of bringing justice into the world, and how honoring parents leads to a just society. Okay? We will discuss, when we get to religion and Noahide, we'll really discuss about that, because there are some things that are very important, and because of the way it affects a Noahide, it's different from the way it affects a Jew. It's a different way of doing it, but it's still there. Okay? So why don't you ask your second question?
Okay, and my second question is something that you may have already answered, but I'm not completely sure. The 10 commandments, the first 3 seem to deal with idolatry, but then the Noahide seems to have 2. So I wonder, is that the concept that you were saying before, that the Jew basically violates 3 sins, but the Noahide violates less? Or are these 3 and 2 mappings actually different when it comes to idolatry between the Jew and the Noahide?
You have to understand the 630 commandments are, in a sense, totally separate from the 7 commandments. As it happens, there's overlap, between the 7 and the 613 in some senses. For example, the laws of sexual immorality for Noahide are not as extensive as the laws of sexual morality for a Jew. There are people that Noahide's allowed to marry that a Jew is not allowed to marry. Okay, so it's similar, but it's much more extensive and it's different. Okay, when we talk about religion, Noahides, maybe I'll do a little bit of discussion about each of the commandments themselves. Rabbi pointed out that I violated one of my things. I don't like referring to religion in Noahides. It's a very, very bad thing. I'm just using it in the sense of religion, in the sense of, well, what kind of a life are you supposed to live as a Noahide? You understand? Noahide as a religious type of life. So what kind of a life you're supposed to live? That's why I mean religion in Noahide. Not like it's a religion of being a Noahide. There's not. There's a paradigm for Noahide, a paradigm for a Jew. It's better to look at it as there's a Noahide paradigm and a Jewish paradigm. How there's similarities to it, but the Noahide paradigm refers to 7 commandments, and the Jewish paradigm refers to 613, and that's what it makes it. And in fact, it's very important to understand that there's 613 commandments, but not every Jew relates to each of them. For example, there's a lot of the commandments that only apply to people who are Kohanim, priests from the priestly family. Okay. Only applies to them. Okay, it doesn't apply to anybody else. There are commandments that only apply to Levites. I happen to be Levite. That only applies to them. Okay, so this concept of distinctions and groupings or subgroupings, just like there's always 7 here, there's 632 commandments, but there really isn't. For example, I'm a Levite. There's a commandment of redemption of the firstborn. That doesn't really apply to me. So I really have 612 potentially, and then you could take all the ones for the temple that I can't do because I'm not Kohen. So you're probably throwing around another 40 commandments. What I'm trying to say is that, yeah, theoretically 613, but I can't do all of them. As a Levite, there's some of them that are not there, and there's some that are for me that are some is in Israel who's not a Levite. It wouldn't apply to them. So, if under these types of distinctions that are there, you can understand we say 7 for Noahide. It's just not much. It's not much different from the paradigm for a Jew. It's just you are not familiar that there's actually such a paradigm. We have 613 commandments, but the paradigm is that not all of these commandments apply to everybody. Right, so Rabbi, with regards to the Torah as a whole, there's only 7 that really apply for Noahide.
I'm thinking specifically about the 10 commandments, the 3 versus the 2 that we have, not the 613.
Yeah, but they're totally different.
They're different? Okay, so we have different idolatry prohibitions.
Well, no, there's no commandment in from the 7 that says explicitly that you're supposed to believe in God, even though we learn it out. It's a logical conclusion from the first 2 commandments. It's not there. When we talk about religion, Noahide, we're going to talk about how these kinds of things, we can have a longer discussion about that there. I don't want to get too bogged down because I have certain concepts I want to get across now, which have caused Noahides a lot of problem in how they're supposed to live. When we get to religion, Noahides, that's going to be fun because it's probably going to take, I'll probably just discuss a little bit and we'll be discussing for hours because that's really your day-to-day life, what it's about. Okay? So let's leave it for there, just knowing that that's going to be, something, in a later unit that we're going to deal with.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Rabbi.
let me get, Linda, you asked a question. Let me have Aaron ask a question. He hasn't asked a question before. Aaron, welcome.
Oh, hi. I'm curious. A lot of the stuff that when you're listening to people, it's almost like they're saying a Noahide and a Jew shouldn't sit in the same room together. I mean, some of the critiques of what people believe that the Noahide laws are saying. Now, I've been around the Hasidic community for 35 years. Now, I know personally that I can go to a rabbi's house during Sukkah, and I can actually help build the Sukkah. I just can't build it myself. I mean, there are certain things we can do. And I know it can be confusing for a new Noahide, but guys who have been in there, when we listen to people critique us about things we know we can do, I wonder, how do you get past that training of other Noahides? So if they see a Noahide doing something he clearly can do, that they don't get confused.
Yeah, that's basically education. Again, the confusion is really the fault of rabbis. I mean, I have to say, I just have to be, it's the fault of the teachers. The teachers have to teach so that they understand. There's no problem, Hey, listen, if you live in Borough Park when I'm making Sukkah, come over help. No problem at all whatsoever. You know, I'm pretty much retired from that. My son does it, but I'm sure my son would enjoy somebody helping him. Sure,
Mhm.
I understand what you're saying. You should be aware, of course, some communities are much more welcoming for Noahides than others. Um, that's just way, you know. I know Chabad is much more welcoming. The community around is much more because we don't have any experience with such things, and quite frankly, our experience with non-Jews has basically been very negative. That's, I mean, you know, now it's even worse. It's very, very dangerous now. Okay, so
I was
it's even worse.
I was born in a Jewish community in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and I've been around Jews all of my life. So
Yeah,
I kind of, uh, I blend in with them very well.
yeah, yeah.
And
I understand.
right, and the thing is that I was discussing one day that I was going to go to was a Rosh Hashanah, the service at Rosh Hashanah. Now I'm allowed to go there, but I'm driving my car. I'm breaking it. Whatever the Jews can't do, I'm doing those things. But just to be in a place where that kind of energy is going on, I don't think that that's forbidden to a Noahide either.
No,
Some
I mean,
ways
listen,
I
you
think
can
it's
go.
beneficial for them to do that.
We actually had our first actual session, Zoom session, was actually about before Rosh Hashanah. So I don't want to repeat that. Um, I don't remember if I have it on my website or not. My discussion of Rosh Hashanah. But in short, and when it comes around Rosh Hashanah time, I'm going to talk about. In short, Rosh Hashanah, you could go to a shul if the rabbi there is comfortable with it. You want to go there, that's fine. You have no obligation to pray anything like that. But you know, if you like going there, I mean, some shuls have a person who prays, and you know, some of them are pretty good actually. It's nice to hear if that's what you want. I mean, that's fine. Um, well, let's leave that in general. When we talk about religion, Noahides, let's talk more about those kinds of issues because that's really the place where it comes up more often. Is what do you do about such things like that? That's more like religion. How you're supposed to live your life. That's more important. Okay. Ronald, I'm gonna let Linda ask her second question. Her hand is still up. Linda, your
Yeah.
hand is still up.
Oh,
And then we'll
yes.
go to Ronald.
Okay, my next question is about divine punishment. What does that mean?
Well, divine punishment means eventually, essentially, that you'd be under a death penalty. But as far as a Noahide is concerned, remember, being a Noahide means from the pious from the nations. If you're the pious from the nations, you have a place in the world to come. You basically lose that. That's basically it. You're no longer considered from the pious of the nations.
So it's important to just know our 7 mitzvahs and
Yeah. Again,
go beyond that.
again, this I know this sounds very, very negative, and when people first hear it, they take it. That's why I want to have a unit on religion and Noahides to show you that there really is a lot more involved here that is absolutely allowed, even according to my opinion. In many senses is more restrictive. I was telling somebody certain things except for certain things like learning Torah and keeping Shabbos and something like that. I'm extremely lenient. I have people calling me up all the time asking, contact me, asking questions. And my views are if it's not touching one of these main things that Rambam talks about specifically, I'm quite lenient as referring to Noahides, what things what they do. But that's just, people have different ways of approaching it. But I'm saying a lot of this stuff is going to be when we deal with religion, Noahides, how your life is actually, is what actually from the 7 commandments, what you can do in your life to make it more, more spiritual. I hate the word spiritual. I'm sorry, because but when we discuss that, we'll get into it. And much of this will become clarified because it'll be more about how you really live your life as a Noahide, being a Noahide in what people would call the religious sense. Okay, so when we get to that, we'll deal with this kind of an issue there. Okay, that's a little bit away from what we're talking now. It's not really on the issue we're doing now. What now I'm trying to discuss just the idea of a Noahide being not Judaism. No, being a Noahide is not being Judaism light. Okay, I want to get that, and then I want to get to the second paragraph 10 because that's where the issues and the problems start coming in from. Okay, Ronald, and then Dan. Linda, do you want to put your hand down so we don't? Okay, Ronald. Ronald, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, on YouTube, Cookie Monster is asking, he's not sure which Jewish denomination he should contact to get more information from, as he's a Noahide. He's saying there is a Chabad community in his town, but understands the founder, they see their founder as the Messiah.
I didn't hear much of somebody tried to call me in the middle of it, but what was the question about which denomination?
Which Jewish denomination should a Noahide get in touch with to get information?
Well, my answer to that would be the same thing. You should only be involved with Orthodox. They're the only one who's going to give you the proper Torah perspective. And also you have to understand that the overwhelming majority of Orthodox rabbis have no idea about the Noahide laws. I mean, they might know the Gemara, they might have learned it, they know the concept of the righteous of the nations, a place in the world to come. And they may have seen from the Talmud a little bit of the Beis Ram, but they don't have the intimate type of knowledge that a Noahide needs to get in order to actually fully live that kind of a life. Okay, it does take, it's learning. There's no yeshiva that teaches. Our next unit is going to be about how to choose out a rabbi and, different things, different types of Jewish learning and stuff like that, where it relates to Noahide. But there is no course of study on the Noahide laws. Okay, so I could talk to somebody and I would know right away if this person has really learned it intensely. I mean, if you look at the notes in Rabbi Weiner on his thing, pretty much where he's been learning. Okay, and he essentially quotes from certain sources that most people don't. So he knows what he's talking about. Rabbi Blumenstiel, I've talked to him personally, and we've had discussions. So him and I know that he's, of all the people that I've spoken to as far as Noahide laws, I think Rabbi Blumenstiel is the one who has the most encyclopedic knowledge. Okay, in my discussions, you wouldn't be able to know the difference, but when people know subjects, you can tell how much they know about it. Rabbi Weiner, we're pretty much, he may have been more involved, but pretty much we're on pretty much the same page. But Rabbi Blumenstiel, his knowledge is encyclopedic. When I give him conclusions that I have, he'll give me 5 places which is agreed with what I just said. Some of them I hadn't even looked at. So, and of course, I quote sources that usually people don't talk about. So, we're going to talk next time. The next unit will be really to give you an idea of when you're speaking to a rabbi, is this a rabbi you should rely upon? Is this a rabbi who, he's a nice guy, he's trying his best, but he doesn't really know enough that I should rely on him when he says things. Because that's very important. Okay, Dan, you're up. I see myself under Dan Barwell, and I know I do. Dan
No,
Barwell
that's you're seeing. Yeah, you're seeing what I'm broadcasting, and so that's why I had to click about 5 clicks before everybody can hear me on both sides.
Dan, I do not have a twin brother who looks just like me, so it's
No, my beard's a little short.
Yeah.
And anyway,
you should know I have never cut my beard in my whole life. This is just how long it grows. Wow.
Anyways, for me, along the same lines as what Robbie and Linda were asking, for me, the hardest thing is, what roots are we permitted to study into Judaism to follow lines of connectivity? I mean, I've been reading a lot of philosophy and stuff, but sometimes, I've been asking my rabbi, am I okay to read this book, that book, this book, that book? And then sometimes it's just too many books to get an answer. I can wait 4 days and I'm already into the book. And point being is one book I've been reading lately. I mean, the rabbi who wrote it, he really drew an understandable connection between, say, causeless hatred, and he linked it clearly to theft and illicit relations and idolatry, and it made perfect sense. And since those 3, theft and illicit relations and idolatry, all are Noahide relevant, I found his explanation, just mind-blowing, that he connected causeless hatred right to it. And for me, it's a joy to come across a material like that that just opens my eyes. And I don't want to. Yet it was clear in the book. I can tell as I'm reading it. Oh, this is clearly to Jews. He's speaking to Jews. And I don't want to be crossing the boundary. So knowing that,
Okay.
I try
two
to
things.
sniff along a breadcrumb trail when I'm following logic, and I don't want to be out of bounds. This is what I'm always concerned about.
Actually, what your question touches on three things, I think. It touches on the idea of religion for Noahide, what kind of things you're supposed to do. And we'll talk about why based with hatred, where it comes in. Certainly not supposed to hate people for no reason. Okay. And we'll discuss why that is, why that certain types of character traits are somewhat obligatory for Noahides. As far as Torah is concerned, we'll deal with what you're supposed to learn with. But also in the next unit, when we talk about rabbis, we'll talk about rabbinic literature and what it is. One of the problems with Noahides approaching rabbinic literature is not understanding different types of literature that exist and different types of ways that rabbis write. Okay. When we talk amongst ourselves, we don't make certain distinctions. So, for example, when you look at commentaries on the Tanakh, Orthodox Jews in general, we don't distinguish between what the verse is actually saying, the simple meaning of the verse, and some truths that we bring out of the verse, which are really not what the verses say. I deal with this constantly when it deals with missionaries using rabbinic literature, but you have to understand that in Judaism we don't. I can give an example which I think you'll understand better. In the kosher laws, okay, there's a prohibition of eating milk and meat. Okay, we also prohibit the eating of chicken and meat. Now, the prohibition of eating chicken and meat is actually rabbinic and not biblical because chicken is not meat. Okay, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, the thing and the laws or whatever. But as a Jew, I don't really make the distinction in my day-to-day life. As a practical matter, it doesn't make a difference whether it's rabbinic or biblical. However, if I'm speaking to somebody else who is not Jewish, the distinction between something being a biblical prohibition and rabbinic is extremely important. Okay, the same thing with interpretations. There's various levels of interpretations that go way outside, and we'll discuss that again. What things you should probably avoid, what things there are. Okay, I would say a lot of things you should avoid only because it could become confusing. You're not going to appreciate it as much for what it is. There's many things that you see in works which is not what the verse is about, but they're bringing out something that's it's a theological religious truth. Okay, we'll discuss it a little bit more when we talk about Torah, when we talk about different types of learning, other that. But as far as that specific work you're looking at, I don't really know what it is. If it's written specifically for Jews and it's not talking about the 7 commandments specifically, explicitly, I would say you should be, if you start seeing things in there that, sound sort of strange to you, you don't really feel you understand, then you shouldn't look at it. It might be very nice, and maybe somebody else could unpack it for you in a simple way so that, it would be, not as confusing, but you don't want to do things that are going to be confusing more than anything else. Okay, there was one question which was asked, which really has nothing to do with it. Grafting plants, that's because there's a rabbinic view that one of the views in the Talmud and Sanhedrin says that Noahides are forbidden to graft plants. I don't believe that that's a halacha as far as Noahides are concerned. But if you take that, if you're more strict about that, I guess it's okay. But again, that's not, unless you guys are farmers, I don't think you have to worry about such things like that. Okay, if there are no more questions, let's go and finish because we haven't really gotten to the real big part, which is the real issue, and that's the next question, paragraph 10. Now, many Noahides and many rabbis who are not really familiar have used paragraph 10 to say that Noahides can add mitzvahs if they're already if they're already doing the 7 commandments, they can add more mitzvahs to what they're doing. Now, this is a fundamental misreading of it. And so I'd like to go through it. Now, there is here a disagreement. When I first do it, I'm going to do it according to the way I would, if you were asking me, and the way that Moshe Feinstein holds. Others, I can bring other things, or Chaim, Chazan. There's a whole bunch of people that understand it the same way I'm going to be teaching. That's the way I understand it. I think that from both a halachic point of view and also from a practical point of view, it's the way Noahide should act. Okay, so we do that. Then I'm going to go back and I'll explain it how Rabbi Weiner and Rabbi Blumenstiel, who take a slightly different way, how they understand it. Okay? Perfectly valid, because those two people are very big Talmudim. They know what they're talking about. It's just there's a difference here as to how they would instruct Noahides. And I think even according to them, Rabbi Blumenstiel, I'm sort of trying to convince him. He's getting close to my with that as a practical matter. As theoretical, maybe you can, but practical not. I know it's what I said now is a little bit confusing, but let's just go with the Rambam himself. Now, the Rambam says this, that a Ben Noach, which usually means Noahide, but also, if we read this to the end, it means both somebody who's Noahide already and even an idolater also. So it's referring for anybody who's descended from Noah. Okay? If they desire to do a mitzvah from the other mitzvahs, what does he mean the other mitzvahs? He means not Shabbos and not learning Torah, and possibly some other mitzvahs. The Radva is one of the commentaries which is accepted virtually universally. Includes among that certain commandments which involve holiness, specific holiness. For example, tzitzis or tefillin, the fringes that you wear, or phylacteries tefillin. We're in Shulman Aruch, we're actually told we're not allowed to sell them to non-Jews. Includes those among the things that he's referring to here as would be the other mitzvahs, meaning that, not these, but excluding them. If he wants to do them in order to receive a reward. Now, in the commentaries here are quite clear. Sort of reward means that he does it as something he's not commanded to, but he wants to do it, and so he wants to be rewarded for it of doing an action. He says, we do not hold them back from doing them if they're doing it according to the halacha, according to law. Now, again, what's very important here, he says that we do not stop them from doing it as long as they're doing it according to the halacha. So let's talk about this way. Let's say I picked on Bob. Let's take David this time. Okay, David, you're visiting my house, and I have my Lulav and Esrog standing around, and David says to me, I want to do that mitzvah. I want to do the mitzvah of shaking the Lulav and Esrog. Okay? According to this, it says we don't have to stop them. Meaning I don't have to stop them. Maybe my Lulav and Esrog, I might be a little bit nervous about that because you could make it unfit to use. But let's use it just as an example. Let's say David is very, very careful. If he wants, I don't have to stop David from doing it. It doesn't say that David can do it. It doesn't say that he gets any reward for it. It just says, I don't have to stop you from doing it. Now, the view taken from the Moshe, it's the one that I believe is more consistent with what the Rambam says earlier, that there's only 7 mitzvahs and no more, is that actually you could do it, but you haven't done any. It's not a mitzvah for you to do it. It's just I'm not responsible to do it. What does that mean? The example I always give is one in Judaism. If one of my children would do something on Shabbos that I see them doing that they're not allowed to do, I am required to tell them, no, you can't do that. Okay? But if my neighbor's child does it, I don't have to stop them. It's not my responsibility. So many times when it says in literature, halakhic literature, legal literature, that you're not required to stop them, it means because the person's doing something wrong, but you have no responsibility to tell them that they're doing wrong. Okay, that's the way that Moshe understands it. That's the way I've always understood it in context of what it says before, that the 7 commandments not anymore. That's why I understand it. But That's why I understand. Okay. Now, there's another view which it's clear that Rabbi Weiner and Rabbi Boone still understanding that it says that we don't stop them, meaning that they have a reward from doing it. They actually, so let's say David takes my legal of an Esrog, and he shakes it. There's some kind of reward that David would have had from that. And so it's not like he did a mitzvah. He did a mitzvah, but he did a very good act of which he wants to get a reward from it, and Hashem would reward it for him. Okay, but Moshe doesn't hold that way. It seems that Rabbi Weiner and Rabbi Blumenstiel do hold that way. It's a valid disagreement. Now, my problem with that is very simple. And Moshe points this out, and other things that it's clear when the Rambam is talking about that you're not to make chiddush das, that he never intended that David should do that continually. David shouldn't have his own and do it every single time. It's like, so that was never intended. So even if you want to say that it's not actually forbidden, the intention was not that he should always do it. He just ends up being at a house of somebody saying, hey, what's it like to do it? So the other person doesn't have to stop him. So that's where the difference is. Now, I haven't seen that Rabbi Blumenstiel or Rabbi Weiner say that specifically. And it's an issue that I brought up with Rabbi Weiner once, is that what if you continually do it? When does it become that you've actually made an obligation to yourself? And it goes, well, he didn't have a clear answer because I haven't seen any where it says any clear answers. I really should probably look more into it. But there's no, as far as I'm concerned, it is clearly a problem. It was not intended that Noahide should do, even if you would do it, even if you would take the lenient view that there's some reward you would get from it, and so there's some advantage of doing it. Again, Moshe doesn't hold that, but even if you take that view, it's doing it continually seems to be a problem. So, it's a kind of thing. It's a little gray area. I'm not going to say that they're wrong. When we get to religion and the Noahide, I'm going to discuss this a little bit more, where they source it from and why I don't think the source applies is the general rule. It only applies in certain specific places like charity, stuff like that. But that's a different issue. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get too complex here, trying to keep it as simple as possible. But there's a little difference. When Moshe says, no, you're actually not allowed, and we're just not responsible to stop you. And others say, no, we don't have to stop. It means because there's something. Yeah, Larry, I guess there's background noise from you. Okay. Understand that these are valid. Their rabbis disagree different things, but I think that as a practical matter, if a Noahide was to do something continually, every year make a sikha, every year, that would clearly end up being a problem, because that's clearly what the Rambam is saying, making the religion for yourself. You're obligating yourself to do something. You're making a Noahide type of religion, okay? And that clear is not what it is. Again, it's a little bit of a gray area, but I think it's quite clear that if you do it continually, that's definitely, I think nobody could say that you're allowed to do that. But, if you do something once in a while, I would say you shouldn't. You see Rabbi Weiner says certain things you can do. It's okay. There's a little place. If you follow Rabbi Weiner, okay, fine. You're not going to go to hell because of it, I don't think. Rabbi Weiner is somebody you can rely upon. But, you should be aware of this. So you see somebody who's more restricted. One of the reasons why I want to do a whole unit on religion and the Noahides is because I want to let you know that you don't have to do such things. There's a full gamut of things that you can do as a Noahide that will fill you up, that you don't have to, say, okay, I want to do that. There's a lot to do in the Noahide life that doesn't require that. So essentially, that's what it is. Now, before I go on, he actually brings two examples of this. So before I do the two examples, which will be the last thing we're going to do today, I want to open up for questions, either here or people listening on YouTube or whatever like that, about this issue. I know most people probably haven't seen the logic behind what these issues are. Now, people who say that you can keep any mitzvah you want, that's absolutely wrong. Okay, we know that. And there are people out there, I won't mention the names, you might already know who they are. This is because these people are basically, when we get to our next unit, we're dealing with, rabbis and learning Torah and different things and so on. You'll understand why. Most rabbis do not learn this stuff. you really have to, I mean, behind me, you can't see me because I have a thing here, but there's a number. I have Rabbi Weiner's, he thinks in Hebrew. I have from rabbis you probably haven't heard of. The Levina Ruv has a book on the Noahide laws. There's a bunch of things. I have Rabbi Schwartz's works on the Noahide laws. I have a bunch of things. I have the there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's a literature on Noahide laws that that people are a minimum you have to know before you can actually talk about it, and expect people to take you seriously. But anyways, and that's the point. Again, I may disagree. I disagree with Rabbi Weiner and Rabbi Bubenstiel, and I've talked to them about it. They know where I'm coming from. They know the legitimacy of what I'm saying, and we just have a disagreement. It's no big deal, whatever. But as far as a practical thing, certainly not. If you do it once in a while, maybe you're visiting somebody who's Jewish, and you visit somebody Jewish, and he asks you for a seder, so you eat the matzahs together with him. I would say probably you shouldn't go to the seder itself, but okay, you go. It's fine. There's certain issues with that. I mean, there's more problems for the person inviting you than for you going there. That you should know. There's a lot of problems inviting a non-Jew to come eat by you on a holiday, much more than on Shabbos. But again, there's some others. That's not what's important. Important is okay, if you're just doing it, you're not doing it. You're something. Okay, fine. You have on who to rely on. People who are scholars, who are knowledgeable, who would say, yeah, there's no problem about it. I would say there's a little bit of a problem about it, but again, I don't have to stop you from doing it. You can do it. It's fine. Whatever. Okay. So that's really where different. It actually is a very, very small difference when you come down to it in practical terms, but it is a difference. And that's why me and Rabbi Weiner, we can be very good friends, even though we disagree about something like this, which you might think is very significant. But for us, it's just a small thing. We understand it. It's not a big deal. It's not like we're saying. It's not like any of us are saying you can do any mitzvah you want. We all agree you can. It's just what happens if you want to do under certain conditions. You're not doing continually. Get invited for a seder or something like that. What is it? Should that's the only place where these things actually come out into a practical difference. So I'm just letting you know because it's out there from legitimate sources, and I want you to understand what these people are saying and how I disagree with it and why I disagree with it. I think my disagreement is basically I don't see how you can do something that's a mitzvah without thinking there's some kind of an obligation to it. The idea of doing something that that you understand it's not a command, but you're doing it anyway, it's very hard to keep that in your mind. Believe me, I know there's certain times when you're supposed to have in mind as a Jew that you're not fulfilling a mitzvah for what you're doing. You have to try and think that consciously that you're not doing it, and it's not very easy to do. Believe me, it comes up under a lot of things, so it's not so easy to do. And of course, when you start doing things more regularly, you really make it yourself psychologically as if it is an obligation, and being an obligation is definitely a problem. Once you feel that something's an obligation for you, then you basically said it's a mitzvah. Even if you say, no, I know it's not a mitzvah, it's basically feeling like it's a mitzvah. Okay, Dan, why don't you talk or relate questions?
Yeah, Rabbi, I got a question from Robin Barney on Facebook. She says, if I can work on Shabbos and don't celebrate the feasts and festivals and not study Torah, then how do I approach someone else and discuss being a Noahide? Most people that I know don't lie, steal, and so on. Basically, it's like telling them just don't believe in JC. Where do we fit in is her question.
That I'm going to go in much more detail when we talk about religion in Noahide, how you live your life. But essentially, the way you attract people to it is by the way you live. If somebody asks you, you do it because the God of Israel wants me to do that. You live your life. I'll give you an example. I used to teach in yeshiva. I don't teach anymore in yeshiva. I work in computers. Where I work, nobody will say a 4-letter word around me. Non-Jews do not do that. Why? Because they've learned already from me that it's objectionable. And they know when I look that I'm religious, so They know that there's certain things around them and where it comes from. As a Noahide, when we talk about Noahide religion for a Noahide, we'll get more into this, and that's how you're going to attract other people. There's another point. You are not required to go out and make other people. It's not a missionary type of thing. Being a Noahide is something for an individual. There's no group Noahide. The Noahide as a movement came about a number, again, 20 plus years ago, because there were just a lot of people who left Christianity who still believed in the God of Israel. So what does the God of Israel have to do with me? They understood from Maimonides. And so they started, and they come together sort of an informal group. There's no class Noahide, okay? It's not something like that, okay? You are, in the end, an individual. This is going to come up a number of times. Judaism is different. Okay, this is one of the fundamental differences between, we talked about this last time about Noahide identity, we talked about this. There's a fundamental difference between a Noahide and a Jew. As a Noahide, you are an individual before God. Okay? As a Jew, that's not the same way. Every Jew has an effect on every other. We're a nation. Okay? And the nation of Israel is judged as a nation. We're going to see that when we're learning about the Torah and Noahides in the Torah. We're going to talk about the Tanakh, and I'm going to show you specifically how the Christian perspective on the Tanakh and is totally not what's there. It's very, very different. Okay? So, the point is that Judaism is a nation. It's a concept of everybody. So, for example, if a Jew sins somewhere, that affects the whole Jewish nation. Okay? So, for example, why are we in exile? It's very clear if you look in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. The Jewish people are in exile. Why? Because the nation is considered sinful, meaning that the people in the nation make it so the nation. As an individual, just like you're an individual, that for Jews as an individual part also. I am an individual, and there's no, so I'm going to be judged as an individual also. But there's also something that does a nation. There's no nation of Noahides. Okay, there's no nations of non-Jews. Then they're just not going to. They're divided up in many different nations. There's no general category of non-Jews, a single unified. That's why it's somewhat different. Okay, Noahides are required for themselves. You spread it by just interaction with people and showing how you are. Somebody asked about Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu didn't run around to people. He invited guests to his house. There's a clear, and those guests to his house, those who came within his area itself, those are the people he influenced. Those who were around him is the ones he didn't go out and trying to convert people, but those who were in this area. And that's basically what it is. Those who are in your area who see you, if you live a certain type of life, then you will have influence on people. Okay, Veronica. Veronica,
Okay,
you see your hand up?
Yes, you can. You had mentioned that as a rabbi, you would tell a Noahide if they were doing something wrong, or you would just say that is basically not your responsibility. Now, so that being said, is there any responsibility for a Noahide that is seeing another Noahide doing something that they shouldn't be doing?
No,
If that makes sense.
no, it's not.
Okay.
The issue may come up if I delve more into the 7 commandments, it will come up certain issues that we see quite clearly. I know I've seen this in the Vinadu has a book on Mitzvahs Hashem. It's probably in the Divine Code also, where it talks about if a Noahide is required to ensure that another Noahide doesn't violate something, and it's quite clear that it's not the case. It's a little bit complicated. I have to give examples, but I don't want to get too up. But the simple answer is no, not really. I mean, obviously, you do want to tell other Noahides what's going on. I mean, I understand that that's natural, but the best way of doing it, of course, is to live when we talk about religion and Noahides, you're going to see how if you live a certain type of life, people are going to see you're doing that. Okay. And the paradigm for that is much different from Christianity. Remember, Christianity, your religion is basically Bible study and group prayer. Okay. For Noahide, it's much different. Okay. And those things that is Noahide, remember, fundamental to Noahide is, of course, the seventh commandment, which is to make the world a just world and like that. So that's what's important. And if you do that, if you're doing that function, people will see you doing it. And, there will some people that will be attracted and some people will not. I mean, I do know that a lot of people who are ex-Christians like get in arguments and people who are Christians and stuff. I know they have that, but as to say as an obligation, no, it's not an obligation. If you like arguing with Christians, Christians, you were an ex-Christian and stuff like that, and you enjoy it, it's not a legal, it's not a not allowed type of enjoyment, Some people like to go to sports games and some people like to online argue with Christians, that's, there's nothing wrong about it. But when I'm talking about obligatory, it's not. Okay, Rabbi. How are you doing, Rabbi?
I'm doing well. You just covered what I was going to ask you. There's groups on Facebook like debunking Christians, and it's not forbidden, but it's not an obligation.
No, and it is a very natural thing.
I like doing it.
Yeah. It's like, for example, I know a number of people who converted to Judaism, and because they got involved as anti-missionaries after they converted. I know that. Me personally, when it deals with people I know convert, I always tell them, just turn the page on the book and forget about it. Just make yourself a better Jew. And my view as far as Noahide, make yourself a better Noahide. Really, just concentrate on, just treat it like a bad dream you had one night, and it's over with. And now you woke up in the morning, and the dream is over, and you're just going out to live it. That's the way I feel. But again, that's a personal feeling. That's not, like a legal ruling. I mean, that's just my personal feeling that I think your life will be much better if you do that. Okay, sometimes you got to get over it. Okay. But again, I do understand. I do understand that there is this, feeling about it, and you want to do it, and it's not, it's not violating anything. There's nothing, it's violated, and I understand the feeling. And if you feel you want to get there and do it, it's okay, fine. It is very common that people who leave a religion, whether it's Islam, whether it's Christianity, spend their time, arguing against it. But
okay. I just have a sister that my brother-in-law, he's a pastor, and I kind of like showing them contradictions and showing them places in the they call it an Old Testament, but they'll quote something and only quote half a sentence, and that's just like what our fake news does today on TV. It's just, you just can't do that.
Robbie, actually, when we talk about Noahides and the Tanakh, the Torah, I'm going to give you some things which will be very useful for you in your discussion with them. After all, I've got 30 years of experience as an anti-missionary, so I know quite a bit about the way they think and these things, But again, family members is a little bit more different, because family members are people you're interacting with a lot. And, since they're very missionary and stuff like that, evangelical about things, you're going to come to having more types of discussions like that, whether you want it or not. That's somewhat of a different story. What I understood the discussion was about, going on Facebook groups and just to argue, just to argue stuff like that, and that, listen, I know a lot of people do it. A lot of people do it. I mean, for example, William has Tanakh Talk. He does it because of that, and he has his, Toby Singers on it. Those things because he was, I understand that feeling, and listen, I was never a Christian, so I can't say that I left Christianity, and so my involvement in counter-mission work is because protecting Jewish people from things. Right. So I don't have the same feelings as you have. So I can somewhat intellectually understand it because I've seen it enough, but I don't have it like, it's not a feeling type of thing with me. It's an intellectual thing that I understand.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Again, it's not forbidden.
I would like to do some one-on-one with you, maybe.
The question is that we have to find the time to do it. I actually have a Facebook group called Judaism's Answer, which I want to do more things. I have people who are in there, but it's been pretty quiet because nobody brings up any questions that we can discuss. And maybe I would make Zoom sessions for that.
I'll look for it. I'll look it up and see if I'm on there.
Yeah, if not, just message me and I'll send it to you.
Okay, put your email address up. Maybe can you do that?
I have so many email addresses.
Oh, okay.
Which one to use?
Which one would you like for someone to ask a question to?
Most people message me on Facebook Messenger.
Okay.
That's really
okay.
where
I kind of have a problem with that because I don't have the app, and when you don't have the app, it's kind of hard to get into Facebook Messenger. You know what I mean?
Well, I most of the time now I do Facebook from online. I log into it from online and I use it from there. So,
but in your group, you talked about I could ask question in there, and you would answer me.
Yeah. I mean, I could give my email address here. Okay, in chat, I put my email address. I do have some problem with my provider's been causing some problems for me reaching Gmail accounts. So sometimes I have to send back to a secondary account, but that's really my main account that I use for such things like that.
Okay,
thank you. Again, I'll do a shameless plug. I do have a group called Judaism's Answer, and that's really where I want to do counter missionary work from. I haven't been able to do it. First of all, I've been very busy with my Noahide stuff and a lot of other stuff there, and there hasn't been much activity. But I really like to do some kind of Zoom sessions there also. Some material. You take a look at it. Okay. I will take a question from YouTube.
Yeah, I have about 5 buttons I got to click. Toshi is asking a question. He says, I have a question. To donate to a poor person or people is correct. Is that correct, right? He says, I think that it is more important to depend on kindness to others. Can you elaborate on Noahides and charity?
Okay. When we talk about Noahides and religion, we're going to talk about charity. Charity is a very important thing. It spreads goodness in the world, so it's a very good thing. And we're going to actually talk about, because the Rambam actually talks about charity here also, but charity towards Jewish people, not charity towards other Noahides. So the answer is short of yes. We're going to discuss that in religion and Noahides because that's one of the fundamental things is to give charity. So it's yes, and we'll talk about that more.
Okay, one more question from Cookie
Sure.
Monster. Cookie Monster saying, is it true if you want to become a Jew, you're not immediately admitted, but are first advised against 3 times? Is this also the case with Noahides? He says because he made first contact, but didn't hear back from them after the first meeting.
Okay, as far as the second question is very simple. The answer to no is no, because a Noahide is being an Orthodox non-Jew. And you're obliged to do it. You're not obliged to be Jewish. Actually, in Shulman is very interesting. It says in the laws of converts, when somebody comes to convert, the first thing that you're supposed to tell them is, why would you want to be Jew when everybody in the world hates us and wants to kill us? That's very apropos for today, by the way. I do not know why. I do not know why somebody would want to become Jewish today, since basically half the world wants to kill us. And most of the rest of the world doesn't really care if they kill us or not. So, yeah. So yeah, we do, discourage it because, we only want people to be Jewish who are sincere about it. There's no reason to convert and just not keep all the commandments. I mean, you could be a Noahide and keep the 7 commandments and you'll be rewarded in the world to come also. So, it's not a necessary condition. That's one of the things that makes Judaism, by the way, different from other religions, Christianity or Islam, is that Judaism says quite clearly that the pious of the nations have a place in the world to come. And if you look essentially at the 7 commandments, They're not like really way out there or any kind of weird thing. You're not asked to do some kind of crazy stuff. You're basically asked to live a life which is normal, refrain from certain things which are immoral, and trying to make the world a better place. So, it's a very universal type of idea. Rabbi, how are you doing? I see your hand up for another question.
That brought up another question, and it goes back to something we talked about earlier. This is it. If a Noahide does a sin that's worthy of death, can a Noahide repent? Will repentance bring him back into the Gan Eden life in the
Okay.
world to come?
Repentance is very interesting. That's a whole chapter for itself. Now, with regard to repentance, the simple answer is yes. Okay? Repentance is always open. We see in the book of Jonah, the people in Nineveh repented of their actions, and Hashem accepted it. So we know that the Noahides can repent. Okay?
Yeah.
So, if you've done something wrong, you should obviously repent. But whereas
Well, I did things wrong before I knew that I was doing them wrong.
Well,
before I became a Noahide.
Unintentional sin is, of course, an unintentional sin. When you become a Noahide, when you recognize what you're supposed to do, you should always ask Hashem to forgive you for acting when you didn't know.
So okay.
I mean, that's quite simple. Okay? Repentance is clearly something that's allowable. However, there is a difference between a Noahide and a Jew in this. For a Noahide, there's no commandment to repent. It's just something that if you do, Hashem will, of course, forgive you because he's compassionate. One of the things in between Judaism and Christianity that's so significantly different is from Christianity, you sort of get the impression that God's waiting there to just send down a lightning bolt and kill you if you just do the smallest thing and get out of line. Okay? And that's not the way it is. It's not as clearly, openly, that's not the way. Hashem is compassionate. There's a verse of the that Hashem is compassionate and he forgives sin. That's a general rule to everybody. Okay? Hashem is always there waiting for it. God is not waiting there to send, it's not like the Calvinists say that you're predestined to go to hell. God, that's just not the way it is. It's not biblical.
Well, I didn't realize that the Jewish people had a mitzvah to repent, that they were commanded.
However, again, for a Jew, there's actually a mitzvah specifically. We learn it with the sacrifices. When you bring a sacrifice, you're supposed to, confess your sins.
Okay, I see that.
Okay, so that's specifically a mitzvah. There's no place where it says there's a mitzvah specifically for a Noahide to do it. But if you've done something wrong then you should repent of it.
Yeah, I see what line you're coming from now. I understand.
I'm just trying to make certain things. It's very important, at least my approach to the Noahide path. It's very important that these distinctions are clear, because if you don't make them, Noahides will drift into the Judaism light.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what we've seen very much. I mean, the biggest group of people who consider Noahides are actually practicing Judaism light. They're not being Noahides; they're practicing a Judaism light. And that's very, for me, that I feel very bad about that, because you've left Christianity. You've left Christianity, and you still recognize the God of Israel, but you're not doing what is required for you to make that real final step, and you're not being guided properly. So that's really what Noahide path is, breaking those paradigms from Christianity and seeing how it's different, and how to live a Noahide life, which is fulfilling both spiritually and doing what you're supposed to do. And there's a lot to it. It involves a lot of developments, personal development that Jews don't actually. Not all Jews do it, but all Noahides are supposed to do. Okay, let me just finish now. We'll take more questions, but I do want to finish the last part of it, because the Rambam gives two examples of what he's talking about when he says that we don't stop non-Jews from doing certain mitzvahs. Okay, and these two examples are very interesting. The first one he brings is If a non-Jew brings a sacrifice, it says specifically the korban olah. The korban olah is a sacrifice which is brought and totally burned on the altar. Unlike, for example, sin offerings are actually eaten by the priests. But the olah is a voluntary offering that somebody brings, and it's brought on the altar. It's totally burnt up. It's totally for Hashem. It's not for anybody else. It's totally burnt up. If a non-Jew brings it, then we accept it. Now, from that, we learn out two things. First of all, what Rabbi means that we don't stop them from doing it. It doesn't say specifically it's a mitzvah for them to do it. We don't stop them from doing it. But more importantly, we learn a second thing with that. And that is, this whole paragraph is talking about all non-Jews. It's not just talking about the Noahides, it's talking about all non-Jews. How do we know that? Because in the Second Temple period, they accepted sacrifices from non-Jews who were actually polytheists. And these polytheists, excuse me, these polytheists weren't doing it as a mitzvah. They were doing it because they thought they would get benefit from it. Those of you who don't know how it works in polytheism is that they believe that their gods have influence in this world. And in order to make sure that the gods don't do anything bad to them, because the pagan gods are very capricious. You know anything about Greek mythology and Homer and the Iliad and the Troy, how these gods are very capricious and stuff like that. The whole war in the Trojan War started when three goddesses argued amongst themselves who's the prettiest, and they gave it to somebody to decide what to do. I mean, you're talking about really weird stuff like that. But these gods, and how do you get them so that they're nice? You pay them off like the mafia. You bring them a sacrifice. You show them. You treat them with honor. Like the Godfather. I think I saw once that. He said, you call me Godfather. You don't give me the respect. You don't call me Godfather. Well, that's what the pagan gods were. You got to give me respect. Show me respect, and then I'll be nice. You'll have my protection. Okay, that's what it's just like the mafia. Okay, so when they brought they would bring sacrifices. They weren't bringing it because specifically from mitzvah. They brought it because this is another god that I want to pay off. So I'll bring him his sacrifice. Okay. So from that we see, more specifically, what the Rambam is talking about is that we don't stop them from bringing it because they're not doing it for a commandment. They're doing it because, according to their religious beliefs, they have to pay off the gods. And so that's what they do. They bring korban oil. The second example is very interesting. The second example is charity. Here he makes a distinction. If a non-Jew is going to give charity to a Jewish person, you accept it from them. You don't tell them not to do it. Because charity is, of course, a commandment. Even though they're not really doing it, they're not saying, I'm doing it because God commands me to give it. They're just doing it because they think they get some benefit. If I give to a Jewish charity, maybe they'll say something. So if you give to a Jewish person, a non-Jew can give to a Jewish person, and the Jew is supposed to accept it. However, there's a big difference. Very interesting, a big difference. If a Noahide, somebody who's from the pious of the nations, gives charity to a Jewish person, it could be given to Jewish poor people. Because Noahides, as we'll find out more, in a sense, are very similar. We are somebody who's keeping the Noahide laws and is considered from the pious nations. We are required to try to help them out. If they, for example, if they live in Israel, we're supposed to help them out like we'd help out the poor of the Jewish people. If you live in a Jewish community where there's a charity or you're a Noahide and keeping the Noah, there's a requirement to support you just like you would support a Jewish person. However, if the person is an idol worshiper, we still accept it. But we give it to poor non-Jews. So if an idol worshiper would give me money, I would give it to a Noahide who's not Jewish because they could take money like that. So again, what we see here again is that the two examples show us two things. Number one, it applies to any non-Jew, whether Noahide or not. And number two, it means we don't stop them from doing it because they're not doing it because the Torah says it's a mitzvah. They're doing it because they have reasons themselves that they're going to get reward from that. Okay, so that supports it. Again, that's, as far as I can see, that supports the view of Moshe that's really not a mitzvah here, but we do it because they're doing that for mitzvah because I think they're going to get something from it. Okay, even though there's no indication that an idolater who brings a sacrifice gets anything from that. As far as a Noahide with charity, when we talk about religion, Noahides we'll discuss that, because there is an indication that an Noahide who gives charity will get some kind of reward for that. Okay, but that's a different issue. Okay, so that, I think, is as far as what I have to say. I will again open up for more questions. And if there are not more questions, we will basically, I'll just announce what the next one's going to be. And we'll leave it at that. Dan, anybody from the other side there? Nobody asking questions? Wow. And that's still very good. Yeah, well, I understand. We've been going like a very long time, which I expected because of the questions. This particular talk now will probably get some of the most questions of all of them. Until we get religion and Noahides, which I expect to get a lot of questions also in discussion, because it's personally involving every single person listening to it. This is, I expected to get a lot of questions. I figured we'd come close to 2 hours.
Okay, yeah, we're getting
Rabbi,
close to that. Rabbi, one more question. Cookie Monster's asking again about on the charity question. Isn't it also good in Hashem's eyes if I give charity to non-Jewish homeless people in my city? I meet in my city.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, that is when we talk about religion and Noahides, we're going to talk about it, and definitely doing things for like homeless people and stuff in your community and stuff like that is extremely important. It's an indirect way, by the way, of spreading the Noahide laws to other people, but also directly, it's actually fulfilling what the seventh commandment of bringing justice and to the world is like, is making the world a better place. Excuse me, making the world a better place. Okay, Robbie, I have you, and then Ronald, and we'll.
Okay, there was a question in the chat. If you could go over the unintentional sin sacrifice. I'm not sure if they meant at the third temple whenever the Messiah does.
The reason why I saw the chat, the reason why I didn't ask the question is because it's not so much. It doesn't relate to Noahides. Noahides are allowed to bring the Ola sacrifice, but not any of the other ones. So it doesn't really apply to a Noahide, and there's no sin sacrifice for a Noahide.
Right, we don't do one.
Yeah, there's no sin sacrifice for Noahide. The sin sacrifice was basically provided sustenance for the priests, because every sin sacrifice, there was a portion given to the priests to eat from. Okay. So that's again, it's a very big issue. If I was talking to a group of people, counter mission, I would talk more about the sacrificial system, because that's very important. But it's a Noahide. It's not really something that has to do with Noahides. It does not have to do with the 7 laws or anything like that. So I would like to say more focused here, rather than go off in tangents of issues that are interesting. If you deal with, if you want to know how to answer one of your relatives with regards to sacrifices, we can talk about that. But as far as the Noahide laws, it's really not part of it. It's not really relevant for Noahides, except if you're going to be learning in the Torah portion of Leviticus. Sure, no problem.
Okay, Simon DeSantis says, is astrology and tarot cards allowed? Any sorts of divination? And I replied, absolutely not. And then he says, source?
Okay, we will talk about that later. I want to leave that for religion, and we can talk about different things like that. Astrology is sort of question. Things like that, these things are astrology. There's really no source for that it works. Some other kinds of divination, there are types of divination which do work. It's true. The question is that really, when I talk about religion, I'm talking about, because I would say that you shouldn't be involved in that, because that interferes with your relationship with Hashem. And while I'm not really quite sure that I could say that there's a specific thing forbidding it, certainly for Jews it's forbidden. Astrology, there's a question about that. There are sources that allow astrology, but nowadays it's not. The other stuff would be forbidden because we're not allowed to do certain things. There's different kinds of and there's all kinds of different types of divination things which the Torah specifically forbids. I would think that a Noahide would also be forbidden. I have to think about that a little bit more. It certainly is something that you shouldn't do, even if it's not explicitly forbidden. I don't think it's something you should do. I think you should just trust in Hashem that what's going to happen is for the best. Okay, I might look into it a little bit more because, I mean, it's not clear that the sources, whether in my mind at the moment. I might just have to look up some sources about that. I just don't think in a practice, I think that very much would interfere with your relationship to Hashem. Okay, if there are not any more questions, I think we will leave it here for now. The next one, Aaron has a question here. So Aaron, why don't you ask your question?
So from what I'm gathering, it would be a good idea for Noahides to establish public charities.
Oh, absolutely. I said many years ago that I will know that the Noahides as a movement have really embarked on the proper way, really know what's going on, when I hear that they have started a Wendell Jones Memorial Hospital. But Noahides have gone together, raised the money, and started a Wendell Jones Memorial Hospital. Based on the Noahide idea that you want to make the world a better place, and a hospital is certainly something that would help that place. Obviously, it requires Noahides with the means, but the principle is that, yes, getting together. Again, when we talk about religion, Noahides, I'm going to talk about this issue specifically. Those who've spoken to me privately know I've talked about that. Is that getting together to do things is certainly one of it. That's the primary reason, in my mind, of why there's a use for a Noahide movement. Other than that, there's no reason to have a movement unless you're going to work together in order to further, the goals in the world. Okay.
Thank you very much for that.
Okay. The next session, I think I was talking with Dan, possibly doing it the day before the Christian holiday, which would be the 24th of December. Because since I missed out November, I want to do 2 in December. And that one I'm going to discuss about the primary example of a group that has basically started to make a religion of their own, and that's the Ger Toshuv. We're going to discuss about that, and I'm going to speak for not just the fact that it's obvious already where they're wrong, but I'm going to go show where they're going off and why they're making the mistakes, and how many things that they're doing wrong that lead to those types of mistakes. Because the paradigm that they're using a Christian paradigm as Noahides, rather than following a paradigm as a Noahide similar to a paradigm as a Jew. They're following a Christian paradigm, and they're the perfect example of what it is. In some senses, more extreme than the Judaism right is. So that we're going to do. I think tentatively it's going to be the 24th. We'll come out within the next week or so.
Yeah, you'll let me know in advance. I'll advertise on Facebook and social media.
Yeah, I just have to make a few notes. I have some of the books on the Ger Toshuv people, and actually, Bob asked me a very interesting question. Studying on Christmas, we don't actually learn from 6 o'clock on. I won't be able to do the 7 o'clock one. I'd have to change the time to an earlier. That's going to be a little bit of a difficult thing. Maybe I'll do the 7 one on Christmas Day itself, which I am about. But our customers from 6 on the eve of that we don't learn. So Dan, we'll have to talk about how to do that. We could always do it New Year's Eve. We could always do it New Year's Eve also, but seems a little bit approaching. Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, we'll see what we could do. Maybe we'll change the time for this one. This one gets a lot of people. So
Well, yeah, because you're getting all the North American people here. I
Right,
mean,
yeah.
we didn't do too bad earlier with the Europeans. Nice to see we actually
Right.
had more Europeans in the group.
What I think we should try and do the next time is we should, do on YouTube all the sessions and see how that works.
Was a possibility. I mean, I've got the green light, and if you want.
Yeah. One second. Let me stop this thing here. Hold on a second.
Recording stopped.
Okay, stop recording. Yeah, I think the YouTube. If you're telling me like 70 people there on YouTube, that's very good. Okay. 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 Yeah. I listen. My purpose is basically to spread the ideas which are the basis for my Noahide Path group. And by the way, I have spoken to Rabbi Weiner and Rabbi Blumenstiel about it, and they have both, voiced support for what I'm trying to do, changing the paradigm that Noahide. They're aware of that, and because my background is counter missionary, I'm much more aware of some things that other people aren't. So, so the more people, more Noahides we can reach on this, the better it's going to be. Okay, there'll be more Noahides making a better movement.
This part 2 series, I think, provoked a lot of thoughts, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversation around it for a bit amongst Noahides.
I don't see any people here with pitchforks, so that makes me happy.
No, much respect,
the
Rabbi.
pitchfork,
Much respect.
so that's pretty good. That means I'm able to explain it in a way that it's understandable and people, I've had problems with that in the past. I know there's a lot of people, but it's an important issue.
Well,
these
I
are
mean,
very
it's obvious you take the time to prepare, and there's a theme to what you're discussing. I mean, is there always a better way to be more eloquent? I'm not the best at it, and never will be. But your points are there, and if anybody's got concerns and questions, I mean,
Okay, so I think now we will leave.
Okay.
Dan, I'm going to send you a link for this third one because that's one I think you should put out for you. And
It's already out there. It's already up there on YouTube. Yeah, the one I've been
fine.
broadcasting. Yeah.
Okay,
actually,
fine. So
the last one you sent me actually ended up being our number one viewed video for a month.
yeah, well, I guess
Yeah,
I'm
so-
very popular.
Well, I don't know about that. It's just a fresh voice, and inquiring minds want to know. And you seem to be a voice that is willing to say no when too many rabbis are saying, "Sure, why not?" And I think that true Yiras Shamayim, I mean, fear of heaven, needs to be there, and I think you conveyed that today. I just hope people get it clear that. The death penalty is from decree of heaven and not
That's a common Christian misunderstanding. And again, if this was actually a counter missionary type of thing, which I would love to give, I'd love to give Zoom groups counter missionary stuff, but I want to keep the Noahide stuff separate. But if it was, we would talk much more about it because. Just like I said, for Noahides have these paradigms that come from Christianity. There are just so many things that Christians do not understand, and when we talk about the Tanakh and Noahides, you can find just how many things that you thought you knew from the Tanakh.
Oh yeah, total shallow end of the pool. Yeah, not even in the same
totally
in the same ballpark. I mean,
yeah.
A lot of cognitive dissonance and aberrant salience in their field. So
Okay. So, anyways, let's stop here.
Okay. I'm going to close down the Zoom meeting then for everybody, and for all you listening out there in YouTube and Facebook, I want to thank you for hanging in there, asking a few questions. If you enjoyed, feel free to share it and like it on social media. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me a message, or if you have a question for Rabbi Shulman. And if you want to see more, let me know. I mean, he's going to maybe do the next series right around the Christian holidays or New Year's, as he mentioned. So stay tuned for that. We had good numbers. We had about 26 people in that Zoom meeting, which is always good. And it's nice when they ask questions. The whole idea is to be interactive and get the answers that you're looking for, like the sources. You want to see the source materials. You know, at least you're getting a rabbi who studied it and not afraid to share it from the source. And yeah, speak clearly. So I'm going to sign out for now. Until next time, have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye for now.